I never should have gone to that dinner. The moment I stepped into the Grand Pacific Ballroom with its glittering chandeliers and orchestral background music, I felt like a ghost crashing his own funeral. It had been nearly 2 years since the divorce, but walking into that room, surrounded by familiar faces pretending not to know me anymore, felt like stepping into a life I used to have and had somehow been edited out of. My name was still on the donor list. I was still listed as a founding contributor to the Mitchell Foundation. But tonight I was just a courtesy invitation. A footnote. Karen had always loved these events, loved the attention, the high heels, the way people circled around her like moths. And to be fair, she was good at it. That kind of room was where she shined. Me? I was the guy in the tailored blazer checking the exits too early, wondering how long I had to stay before it was socially acceptable to leave. I told myself I was there to support a good cause, that I was above the past. But the truth? I went because I didn't want her to think she could erase me. I went because I didn't want to be the bitter ex who couldn't be in the same room as his former wife. But mostly, I went because I still hadn't figured out how to stop caring. Karen noticed me almost immediately. She was standing near the stage, greeting guests like royalty, her smile warm and practiced. She wore a deep red dress that clung to her like a secret and made every man in the room glance twice. It was the same way she'd looked the first time we met, confident, magnetic, dangerous. Her eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment I thought I saw something real there, maybe surprise, maybe discomfort. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a knowing, controlled grin. The kind of grin that says, I expected you to come. And you're exactly where I want you. I mingled for a while, said hello to a few people I used to call friends. Everyone was polite, cordial, but I could feel it, the distance. No one asked how I was. No one brought up music or the studio or anything I'd been doing since the divorce. It was like I'd been cut out of the story, like some character that had been written out between seasons. They'd moved on. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I hadn't. When the dinner began, I was placed at table 9, close enough to the front to be visible, but far enough from the stage to make a point. Karen, of course, sat at the head table directly under the spotlight with Miles Whitaker beside her. The new husband. The media mogul. A man who could get a senator on the phone faster than I could get a parking ticket waived. I'd done my research on him. Of course I had. Miles was 10 years older than Karen, twice as rich and 10 times more ruthless. He owned 3 newspapers, a cable channel, and a political podcast network that somehow made the word moderate sound like a threat. His smile never reached his eyes, and when he looked at Karen, it wasn't affection I saw, it was pride. Possession. Dinner was quiet. The chicken was dry. The wine was decent. I was counting the minutes until I could slip out unnoticed when the lights dimmed and Karen stepped up to the podium. She tapped her glass lightly, an old trick she'd used 100 times before. The room went quiet. The spotlight found her. And then she raised her glass. To every woman, she said, her voice ringing clear through the speakers, finding the strength to leave a husband who holds her back. There was a pause. Then laughter. Not polite chuckles. Laughter. Some people laughed because they didn't know the backstory. Others laughed because they did. A few turned to look at me, then quickly turned away as if ashamed to be caught watching the fallout. My stomach dropped. My face flushed with heat. I stared at Karen. She didn't flinch. She didn't break eye contact. Her smile widened as if daring me to react. Miles raised his glass beside her, smug and silent. In that moment, it hit me not just what she'd said, but the timing. The delivery. That wasn't a toast. That was a bullet. That was a statement carefully designed, rehearsed, and delivered to perfection. And it wasn't just for her friends or the board members. It was for me. A message. You were the anchor. He's the sail. I didn't get up. I didn't walk out. I just sat there, pretending I was unaffected, while inside everything clenched. The chicken on my plate might as well have been cardboard. I couldn't taste a thing. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the tablecloth like it held the secret to why I'd ever thought we were still on decent terms. After the speeches were over and the band started up with some watered-down jazz, I made my way to the bar. I waited until Karen was alone, sipping her wine and chatting with a man who clearly wanted her attention and wasn't getting it. I stepped beside her, calm but boiling inside. Was that really necessary? I asked, my voice low, controlled. She turned to me slowly. Ethan, she said, as if surprised to see me. It was just a joke. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I used to know. But there was nothing. Just that smile, tight, controlled, familiar. You meant it, I said. You planned it. She didn't deny it. She just took a sip of her wine. then leaned in a little closer. "If the shoe fits," she whispered, and then turned back to her conversation as if I'd never been there at all. I walked out not long after that, skipping dessert, skipping the post-event schmoozing. Outside, the wind off the sound hit me like a slap, and I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling, even if I hated every second of it. I didn't go home right away. I drove around the city, through Capitol Hill, past the old recording studio we'd started together back when we had more dreams than sense. I ended up parked outside our old house. She didn't live there anymore, but I guess I just wanted to see it. I stared at the windows, remembering the nights we stayed up talking until 3 a.m., dreaming about building something real. I remembered the day she got the call from the bank, offering her that first job in finance, and how proud she'd been. I remembered the fights, about money, about time, about her growing world and my shrinking one. Mostly, I remembered the way she used to look at me, with fire, with hope. That was gone now. All that was left was a toast, a laugh, and a ballroom full of people who'd already picked a side. And it wasn't mine. I drove home in silence that night, the laughter from the ballroom still echoing in my ears. The kind that doesn't fade with distance. It settles in your bones, makes a home out of humiliation. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone. I just sat with it, the words, the eyes, the smirks. And under all that, a single thought kept repeating like a chant I'd been trying not to hear for years. You should have seen this coming. But the thing about betrayal is, it's rarely loud when it starts. It's slow. Trickles. A missed call here. A strange excuse there. You tell yourself it's stress. Work. Life. You trust. Until trust turns into denial. And denial, well, denial is comfortable right up until the moment it explodes. 2 years before the divorce, things started to shift. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make me uneasy if I looked too closely. Karen started working late. A lot. First, it made sense. Her bank was merging with a larger firm, and she was one of the only female executives at her level. I admired her drive. Always had. But back then, she used to come home from those kinds of nights exhausted but eager to tell me every detail. Who said what in the meeting? Who underestimated her? How she proved them wrong? She used to lean into me, glass of wine in hand, kick off her shoes, and just breathe. Then one day she stopped. She stopped sharing. Stopped looking me in the eye when she walked in at midnight. Started saying things like, "It's complicated," or "You wouldn't understand." And I didn't push, at least not at first. I thought I was giving her space. I thought that was what a supportive partner did. The first real red flag came on a random Thursday. I had borrowed her car because mine was in the shop. She'd left it parked outside the studio, and when I opened the trunk to unload some equipment, there it was. A men's jacket. Charcoal gray, expensive looking. Not mine. At first I laughed, nervously, awkwardly. Thought maybe she'd grabbed it by mistake at a conference. But when I asked her about it later that night, she barely blinked. "Oh, that is just one of my colleagues. He left it in my car after lunch last week. I told him to come grab it, but he hasn't yet." She said it so casually, so calmly, and maybe it was true. Maybe it really was just a jacket. But something in her voice, detached, almost bored, sent a chill down my spine. That jacket stayed in the trunk for another month. Eventually, I threw it in the back closet just so I wouldn't have to look at it anymore. Then came the passwords. Karen and I had never been the type to hover over each other's phones. But we shared a laptop for years. We knew each other's passwords for everything from Netflix to our joint tax software. It was never a problem, until one day, her login stopped working on our shared Dropbox. "New security policies," she said, without looking up from her phone. "They're making us change everything at the bank." It's annoying. Seemed reasonable. Except she also changed the passcode on her phone, and her tablet, and the password to her email, all within the same month. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was her job, that it was none of my business. But the truth was starting to whisper to me in the quiet hours of the night. The hours when she was still at work and I was home reheating leftover pasta, wondering who she was becoming. I remember one night I couldn't sleep. I got up around midnight, walked into the bathroom and heard the shower running. Nothing unusual. Except her phone was propped up on the counter. Not in its usual spot on the charger. And it was unlocked. That was new. I'm not proud of what I did next. I wish I could say I walked away. That I respected her privacy. But I didn't. I picked it up. There were no messages. No photos. No notifications at all. Just a single active call timer. The phone was muted. My heart stopped. I put it down quickly, stepped back. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe she had dialed something by accident. But when she came out, towel around her, hair dripping, I saw the screen light up for a second before she quickly turned it over. I didn't ask. She didn't explain. We went to bed in silence, our backs to each other. It was like sleeping next to a stranger. Over the next few months, she started traveling more. Conferences. Retreats. Networking weekends. Always short notice. Always last minute. Always with the same vague details. She would come home sun-kissed and glowing with new earrings or a bottle of wine from the airport. She had never brought me back souvenirs before. I wanted to believe it was just a new phase. That we were growing differently but still growing. That the silence in our home wasn't a warning, it was just life happening. But the longer I told myself that, the more I stopped recognizing us. We used to cook together. Used to play music while we cleaned. Used to share a playlist we both added to, a strange mix of indie, jazz, and acoustic covers. One day I asked her if she'd heard the new song I added and she blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. You still update that? She hadn't checked it in 6 months. That night, I sat in the studio alone, playing back old recordings of us, laughing, talking, trying out silly harmonies at 2 a.m. It felt like listening to ghosts. I remember asking her once, during dinner, "Do you still feel like this is working?" She paused, fork halfway to her mouth, and said, "What do you mean?" "Us," I said. "Are we okay?" She set her fork down. Smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course we're okay, Ethan. We're just busy." That was always her answer, busy? But busy isn't what makes someone flinch when you touch their shoulder. Busy isn't what makes someone stop using your name when they say goodnight. Busy isn't what changes your marriage into a business partnership with legal benefits. After the gala toastgate, as I now refer to it, I couldn't stop replaying those years. Not just the toast, but the build-up. The evidence. The pieces I ignored because I was too afraid of what they might mean if I connected them. Maybe the joke wasn't that she left me. Maybe the joke was that I stayed so long, pretending I didn't see the cracks forming right in front of me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, the glow of the streetlights casting strange shadows across the walls. I thought about the jacket, the passwords, the muted phone call, the conferences, her laugh at the gala, the way Miles looked at her like she was his greatest acquisition, and the way she looked back like she'd already forgotten my name. It was 3 weeks after the gala when the final piece fell into place. I wasn't looking for it. That's the thing, when the truth comes, it rarely knocks. It barges in, uninvited, unannounced, and unforgiving. I was in Oregon on business contract negotiations for a licensing deal with a new audio tech company. They'd booked us into this resort just outside of Bend, one of those luxury, retreat-style places with fire pits, hiking trails, and overpriced wine tastings. Not my scene, really. But the client loved it and I needed the deal. I just checked in, tossing my bag on the king-sized bed when something caught my eye from the window. The parking lot. More specifically, the car in the parking lot. A silver BMW X3 Washington plates with a tiny red sticker on the rear windshield, Karen's alumni decal from Northwestern. My stomach flipped. I knew that car. I used to drive that car. I taught her how to parallel park in it, for God's sake. I stared at it for a long moment, convincing myself that it couldn't be hers. It couldn't. It had to be a coincidence. Someone else with the same model. Someone else with the same university sticker, even though I'd helped her scrape that thing off a dorm room window 15 years ago. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. I tried to let it go. I did. I told myself maybe she had a conference. A leadership seminar. Some kind of executive retreat. But when I asked the concierge later, purely out of curiosity, they told me there wasn't any professional group booked for the weekend. Just couples. Just people getting away. The next morning, after a restless night, I headed down to the main lounge area to grab a coffee. And that's when I saw her, Karen, sitting on a couch near the fireplace, her legs curled under her, laughing, with Miles. It wasn't subtle. She was in a soft cream sweater, the kind she used to borrow from me on rainy Sundays, and he had his hand resting on her knee like it had always belonged there. Between them sat 2 glasses of wine, at 10 in the morning, and a half-eaten charcuterie board. No laptops, no notebooks, no evidence of work. Just 2 people in the kind of int asterisk Macy you don't fake. I stopped in my tracks. They didn't see me. I stood just behind one of the pillars, close enough to hear them, far enough to stay hidden. She leaned into him, said something I couldn't make out, and he kissed her. Not quick, not shy. A kiss that said this wasn't new. That was the moment. Not the kiss, not the laughter, not even the car. It was the realization that they looked practiced, familiar, like this wasn't a getaway from work. It was a tradition, something they'd done before, something they planned. And I understood then, fully painfully, that this wasn't just betrayal. This had been going on for a long time. Long before the divorce papers. Long before the cold dinners and the half-truths. Maybe even before she ever admitted she wanted out. I backed away, heart pounding. I couldn't stand there a second longer. My hands were shaking, and I didn't trust myself to keep it together. I went back to my room, locked the door, and just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the black screen of the turned-off TV. You'd think there would be rage, but there wasn't, not right away. What I felt first was grief. Not just for the marriage, for the lie, for the time, for every night I made her dinner while she worked late, for every anniversary gift I carefully picked out while she was planning weekends with someone else, for every fight I took the blame for, thinking maybe I wasn't supportive enough, not fun enough, too stuck in my own routine. But mostly I grieved the version of her I thought I knew. The woman who used to dance barefoot in our kitchen to Billie Holiday. The woman who cried when I surprised her with a framed photo of her dad on our wedding day. The woman who once told me that I made her feel like home. That woman was gone. Or maybe she never existed. That afternoon, I skipped the scheduled meetings. I took a walk instead, through the woods behind the resort, past the overpriced spa, down to the lake where paddle boats sat tethered and ignored. I needed air, space, something to hold on to that didn't feel like betrayal. My phone buzzed around 5, a text from the client, asking if everything was okay. I stared at the screen and typed back, family emergency. Need to cut the trip short. It was a lie, but it was cleaner than the truth. I checked out the next morning before sunrise. I didn't try to talk to her, didn't leave a note, didn't make a scene. What would be the point? They were together. That was the truth. And they had been while I was still in the picture. While I was still believing in a future she had already sold off for spare parts. On the drive home, my head buzzed with noise. Flashes of moments I now saw differently. A missed anniversary dinner because of a client crisis. That weekend she insisted we spend apart so she could clear her head. The sudden, elaborate skincare routines she picked up at 11 p.m. before bed. They say hindsight is 20/20ths. But this wasn't just hindsight. This was excavation. Unearthing a different version of our entire relationship, built not on love or partnership, but on layers of concealment. On cracks she painted over with lipstick and press releases. Back in Seattle, I didn't go straight home. I went to the studio, my sanctuary, the only place she never cared about. She used to say it smelled like dust and old wires. Too many ghosts in there, she once joked. But it was mine. I plugged in my headphones, turned off my phone, and played. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Just to prove I was still here. That I could still create something honest in the rubble of something false. When I finally got home, I noticed something strange. A letter had arrived from the Mitchell Foundation. A thank you note. One of those automated, cheerful letters about continuing our journey together. I stared at it, laughing bitterly. I'd funded part of her foundation's first year. She had thanked me in private. She used my name in public. And now she toasted to leaving me behind like a roadblock she finally got around to bulldozing. I put the letter down, poured myself a drink, and then I opened my laptop. There would be consequences. I didn't know what yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let the final version of our story be written by her. There's a specific kind of silence that follows betrayal, not the soft, grieving kind, but the razor-edged quiet that comes when you've finally stopped hoping. That was the silence I found myself in the week I returned from Oregon. I wasn't crying. I wasn't pacing. I wasn't screaming into the night like some scorned movie character. I was done. Done pretending I didn't see what I saw. Done rationalizing red flags. Done letting Karen dictate the narrative. She had chosen public humiliation. I was going to answer her in kind, not with a speech, not with a tantrum, but with precision. With consequence. Step 1, the investments. When we divorced, we kept things surprisingly civil. Part of that included the financial entanglements, shared stakes in a few green tech startups, some mutual fund ties, and of course, the bank where she worked. I hadn't pulled out at the time. I didn't want to be spiteful. But now? Now it was principle. I called my financial advisor and gave him clear instructions: sever all ties. Liquidate the accounts connected to her bank. Pull my name from the joint equity stakes where she was listed as an executive partner. Quietly. No press. No drama. Just disappearance. It caused a ripple almost immediately. A week later, I got a call, not from Karen, but from her assistant. Polite. Curious. Vaguely panicked. Mr. Blake, she said, her voice careful, I'm reaching out on behalf of Ms. Mitchell to confirm whether the portfolio changes were intentional or... They were, I said, cutting her off. No need to follow up. Click. Step 2, the foundation. Karen's pride and joy. The Mitchell Foundation was her baby. A nonprofit she built on the bones of our marriage and the back of my original seed money. It funded scholarships, women's leadership programs, and networking events. A noble mission. But it had become, over time, less about charity and more about clout. About headlines and red carpets. About leveraging names like mine to get donations from names much bigger than mine. I knew how much my support still meant, symbolically at least. So I pulled it. Every last dollar. I didn't make a scene. No statements. Just a signed withdrawal notice sent to the board stating that I was ending all association, effective immediately. I'd honor existing grants I'd personally funded, but no new money would come from me. Not a cent. I expected her to reach out. She didn't. Not at first. Instead, I started hearing things. Quiet things. Whispers from shared contacts. A board member who said Karen seemed more tense than usual. A former colleague of hers who called me to ask, not so subtly, if I'd be willing to reconsider, given the optics. The optics. Because that's what it was always about in her world. Not truth. Not trust. Just how it looked. Step 3 came the night of the Bennett Trust dinner. It was a formal event, black tie, mostly business leaders and community figures. I wasn't going to go at first. But my name was on the ticket and my firm had donated a silent auction item. So I went. I figured I'd shake a few hands, drink mediocre scotch, and leave before dessert. And then I saw her. Karen. Red dress again. Not the same one from the gala, but close enough to send a message. She had Miles on her arm, of course. Always did at these things. He was the perfect accessory, wealthy, polished, and self-satisfied. She spotted me the second I walked in. Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew sharper. I kept my distance. Made small talk. Ate dinner. But toward the end of the evening, as coffee was being served, Karen stood to make a toast. Of course she did. She clinked her glass gently, and the room quieted. Before we all go, she said, her voice smooth, I just want to say how wonderful it is to be surrounded by such brilliant, empowered people. Especially the women here tonight who continue to rise, despite the men who once told them to stay in their place. A few chuckles. Polite applause. And to those women who had the courage, she added, eyes briefly flicking in my direction, to leave men like my ex in time. I raise a glass to you. Laughter. Louder this time. Not all, but enough. Some glanced at me. Some didn't need to. I stood. No reaction. Just stood up. Calm. Collected. I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. I walked toward her table. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just deliberately. When I got there, I didn't say a word. I placed the envelope, heavy, creamstock paper, sealed with my lawyer's insignia, on the table in front of her, between her water glass and her delicate silver clutch. What's this? She asked, loud enough for those near us to hear. I didn't answer. I just looked at her. For maybe 2 seconds longer than I should have. Then I turned and walked out. No speech. No tantrum. Just the sound of my shoes against the marble floor. That letter contained formal notice, all financial disengagements finalized. All sponsorships severed. A clear declaration of legal distance. It wasn't just paperwork. It was closure. She called me 2 days later. I didn't answer. She emailed me the next morning. I didn't reply. That afternoon, a bouquet arrived at my office, orchids, her favorite. No card. I gave them to the receptionist. That evening, a voicemail, Ethan, please call me. Just, please. I deleted it. This wasn't about hurting her. It was about freeing myself. Because for too long, I'd been the man in the corner of her story, quiet, supportive, soft-spoken. The man she could discard and then reference in speeches as a lesson learned. Not anymore. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way. I was clear. And there's nothing more dangerous to someone like Karen than a man who's done hoping, done pleading, done waiting for an apology that isn't coming. The night of the dinner became a local talking point. Did you hear what Ethan did? He didn't even flinch. Did you see her face? But I didn't need the gossip. I didn't need the vindication. What I needed, what I finally had, was the weight lifted. I didn't miss her. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her anymore. I was just done. And for the first time in years, that felt like power. Not the kind you use to hurt. The kind you use to heal. To rebuild. To move on. The knock came on a Thursday. I was in the studio, half lost in mixing an ambient track I wasn't even sure I'd keep, when I heard it, 3 measured taps against the front door. I paused the music, removed my headphones, and just listened. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries. No appointments. And for a moment, I hoped it was a neighbor needing help or maybe a lost tourist looking for the cafe up the street. Anything but what I knew deep in my gut it was. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Karen. Hair tied back. No makeup. Wearing a gray sweater and jeans. Not her usual armor. No statement dress. No curated smile. Just her. For a second, neither of us spoke. She looked unsure, maybe even nervous. And that, more than anything, threw me off balance. Hi, she said finally. Hi, I echoed. Flat. Neutral. Can I come in? I thought about saying no. Thought about closing the door, pretending I hadn't seen her. But instead, I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, taking in the studio. She hadn't been here in years. Not since before the separation. Back when it was still her place, not just mine. She paused by the old upright piano, brushing her fingers across the lid like she was remembering something. Or pretending to. It's quieter than I remember, she said softly. I didn't respond. She turned to face me. I know I shouldn't be here. I know it's probably the last thing you want. But I had to see you. Just once. Without an audience. Without toasts. I raised an eyebrow. Did you come to apologize? Her eyes flinched, but she didn't back down. No, she said. Not just that. She walked over to the couch and sat. I stayed standing. She took a breath, then dove in. Things with Miles didn't start until after the divorce. I know you don't believe that, and I get it. But it's the truth. I laughed once. Quiet, bitter. You sure you want to open that door, Karen? Because I saw you too. At the resort. In Oregon. She didn't deny it. I know. I figured you had. Was that post-divorce too? Or just post-conscience? She looked down. It wasn't like that. No? I asked, folding my arms. Then what was it like? Enlighten me. I was lonely, she said quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. And angry. And stupid. Those are feelings, Karen. Not facts. Her jaw tightened. I didn't cheat on you. You did everything but, I said. You lied. You erased me from your life in front of hundreds of people. You joked about leaving me like it was a TED Talk. That's worse. She looked like I'd slapped her. I didn't think you'd be there, she whispered. You toasted to leaving your husband. And laughed. With your new one beside you. Doesn't really matter who was in the audience, does it? She swallowed hard, but her voice stayed steady. I know I hurt you. I know that now. But you hurt me too, Ethan. That made me blink. Me? Yes, she said, her eyes meeting mine. You were always there, but not really. Not emotionally. Not when I needed you to be. You listened, but you didn't hear. You supported me, but you never challenged me. You made it so easy to leave because you were already gone long before I packed a bag. I didn't speak for a long time. Because, damn it, part of me understood what she meant. I did retreat near the end. I did stop asking questions when her answers became sharp. I avoided conflict instead of facing it. I tried to love her quietly, hoping it would be enough. It wasn't. You're right, I said finally. Her eyes widened. I should have fought harder. Should have asked what was really going on instead of pretending I didn't notice. I stopped trying because I thought you'd already left me emotionally. But I never stopped loving you. Silence again. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. That's the worst part. You did love me. You were a better man than I gave you credit for. You said I held you back. She shook her head. No. I said that to hurt you. To make myself feel better. Because if you were the villain, then I didn't have to feel guilty. I exhaled, the weight of that admission heavier than I expected. Do you know, I said, walking toward the console, how many times I paid your half of the mortgage without telling you? How many nights I stayed up editing your presentations when you were too tired to finish? She nodded, quiet. And when the bank let you go that first year, who helped get you the job at the second firm? You did, she whispered. I looked at her. I never threw that in your face. Not once. Not when you succeeded. Not when you left. And yet you still found a way to make me the villain in your story. I was scared, she said, the tears now falling. I didn't know how to be strong without being cruel. Well, I said, sitting across from her, you nailed the cruelty part. She laughed, a broken, regretful sound. I'm sorry, Ethan. I really am. Not because things ended, but because I ended them like that. I nodded. I didn't come here to get anything from you, she continued. Not your forgiveness. Not your money. I just wanted to look you in the eye and say that I know I was wrong. I leaned back. I believe you. She looked stunned. I believe you, I repeated. But that doesn't mean I want you in my life again. I understand. I stood. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not yours anymore either. She nodded, wiped her face, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. What's this? A photo, she said, handing it to me. Of us. From back then. You can throw it away. Or keep it. I just didn't want to keep rewriting the past to suit me. You were good to me, Ethan. I see that now. I looked at the photo. It was us at the lake house, summer of 2014. I was holding a guitar. She was laughing, barefoot in the grass. Back before everything got so damn complicated. I didn't know what to do with it. When she reached the door, she paused. You were never the problem. You were just the reminder of who I used to be. And then she left. I didn't cry. I didn't follow. I just sat there, holding that photo, the music still paused behind me. And I realized something simple and strange. I didn't need her to apologize. I just needed her to finally understand. And now she did. It was Sophie who surprised me next. She called out of the blue one evening while I was tuning a vintage guitar. I hadn't expected much, just the usual check-in from college. But instead, her voice was buzzing with a strange mix of nerves and excitement. Dad, can I tell you something without you freaking out? That's how you know something big is coming. I'm not going to law school, she said quickly. I don't want to be a lawyer. I didn't speak right away. She rushed in to fill the silence. I've tried to want it. Really. For Mom. For stability. But every time I picture my future, it's not in a courtroom. It's in a studio. With music. My chest tightened, but not in the way I expected. You don't have to be me, I said gently. I know, she replied. But I want to be. She told me about songs she'd been writing. A friend at school with recording equipment. A label scout she'd met at a campus gig. She wanted to come home for the summer to work with me. In the same studio Karen once rolled her eyes at. When I told her yes, she cried. The next week, she moved into the guest room and got to work. She had real talent. Not just raw SK*LL, but instinct. She picked up the rhythm of the studio like it was built into her. Watching her sing behind the mic for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. When she told Karen, I braced myself. I expected resistance. Anger. But instead, Karen said nothing for a long moment on the phone. Then, if this is what she wants, I'm not going to fight it. And after a beat, she added, she gets her fire from you, you know. I didn't know what to say to that. But for once, it felt like something resembling peace. Months passed. Karen and Miles separated in the fall. The news wasn't public, but the circles we both moved in whispered fast. Rumors of misused funds. Conflicts of interest. A PR nightmare she was trying to clean up quietly. I didn't ask for details. I didn't care. Then came the email. She invited me to speak at a foundation conference, ironically themed Unconventional Paths to Success. She wrote, I understand if you say no. But I think your voice is needed. And I know you do it for them, not for me. I almost deleted it. But I didn't. I showed up that day in jeans and a dark blazer. Not to impress. Just to be me. I talked about music. About failure. About betrayal, too, but in abstract terms. I spoke to the people in the room who were told their path wasn't valid. The ones told they needed to be safer, more practical, less emotional. I ended with this. You don't have to set fire to the past to be free. You just have to stop letting it tell you who you are. Karen was in the front row. She stood and clapped. But I didn't need it. That applause wasn't validation. It was punctuation. I left before the reception. Drove home with the windows down, Sophie's demo playing on the stereo. Her voice, clear, powerful, filled the car. This wasn't revenge. This was freedom. From her judgment. From the past. From needing her approval ever again. And that finally was enough.